Welcome back to Pentester Diaries. In this episode, longtime core member and Cobalt Research Manager Robert Kugler talks with Grahame Turner, an experienced security technical writer. In this episode, they'll look at report writing, why it's important, and tips on how to improve your writing as a pen tester. Let's dive in.
Welcome back to Pentester Diaries. My name is Robert Kugler, and I'll be your host for this episode. Today, I'll be talking with Grahame Turner about report writing. Thanks for joining us, Grahame.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
Cool. All right. So report writing is like a super boring or maybe exciting topic. So that's why we have you today. So we'll dive a little bit more into what makes it exciting for you and how can we maybe as a pen testers look at it a bit more like positive instead of like the most boring part of the whole pen test process. So yeah, let's get right started here, and maybe you can tell a little bit more about yourself.
Sure thing. So yeah, I am a senior technical writer for Cobalt. With I work with the Pentest Ops team on mostly editing reports and editing the templates that make up reports. It's all reports all the time over here, and I've been doing this for about 4 or 5 years now. Started with another pen testing company, and then prior to that I kind of bounced around from corporate training to journalism to technical writing for a financial company to a couple of stints in retail here and there. So I've kind of been all over the place, and then kind of settled into security because it's fascinating, but also it's like linguistically interesting.
Wow. Okay, I guess that's a pretty long journey coming from finance to pen test reports. So interesting one. Interesting, definitely. Yeah. So what is like the most exciting thing for you when you're like looking at the pen test report? Because that's probably what made you stick to security in the end.
It's a good question. I think it is just the like my skills, I wouldn't say are extremely technical. I've got like sort of a passing understanding of a lot of things, or at least enough to kind of make a mess and then fix it. But it is kind of interesting to just see like the sort of interface between people and computers, and the fact that like on the one hand, computers can do things that we couldn't really dream of, but then we can also pull the wool over their eyes very easily and make them do things that they shouldn't do, like, give people access to stuff they shouldn't have access to. And in extreme circumstances, I've seen internal network tests end up looking at like the CEO while they're doing work on their computer, because the computer, as smart as it is not thinking about the kinds of things that we're worried about. So it's very interesting to kind of see that interplay. But it's also just kind of fun to work with, testers from all around the world and get to know kind of what they're interested in and what their skills are, and how they make computers do stuff.
Oh no, definitely. And then we come here right to our topic today with pen test reporting, because it's pretty important to be able to tell that story, because it's like it doesn't really provide any value if you just break stuff if you can't tell the story how you came there, and most importantly how you fix it again. So that's super important. So what's basically for you the most important thing that a pen test report should have, and then we can later look a little bit at the findings individually.
Yeah. I think the findings are definitely a very important component, and I think the really important part of a report is that it's got to kind of tell the story. Because a pen test, yes, it's a series of individual tests. It's got that sort of scientific aspect of like, we tried X and this didn't work. We tried, Y with a different variable and that worked. So you've got that, but then you're also kind of trying to make it accessible to a certain extent to people who don't have the same level of technical background. So like, I may not know, JavaScript version 1.3 or whatever. I just made something up that probably doesn't exist. But, I may not know like specifically what the vulnerabilities are, but I know that if I'm looking at an outdated piece of software, like I do know what that means. And so I'm kind of, when I'm looking at a report, one of the things I'm trying to find is like, what is the stuff that I know generally people can understand? what's the technical aspect that underlies it, and how can I kind of make those two things speak to each other, so that people who are reading it can kind of, even if they don't have a super technical background, they can at least pick up, like, this is bad for this reason, and I need to fix this by asking somebody who knows what they're doing to do X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, you touch upon a pretty important topic here, and that we're facing as pen testers all the time. And like when we are writing the executive summary or the executive analysis, we tend to forget sometimes that we have a completely different audience here, that we are not actually talking to the security engineers, but probably more C-level. So how can we make this as understandable as possible?
Yeah, I think some of it is kind of the thinking about the level of granularity that you need to get into. So the version numbers was a kind of a good example, even if my example wasn't a good example, where, like, again, the specific version for an executive probably isn't going to make a difference, but the fact that it's past end of life and isn't going to get any updates, like that makes a difference to somebody who's reading it. Kind of trying to explain, I think story, I used the word earlier, story I think is important, because I think it's something that humans kind of naturally do, is we try to tell things as stories. That's why fiction continues to exist, because it helps us kind of understand things. So framing things in a narrative structure helps, where you've got, like, so we started by doing X and that didn't work. We started by doing, then we tried Y, that worked, and we got this far. And, I wasn't able to break your system completely, but if somebody had more time, more resources, they could probably do more damage. For example, A, B, or C.
Okay, all right. So for writing that story, that basically puts everything together and kind of tells the reader how we got here. Where do you start with that? Do you really write a little summary of it in the exec analysis, or do you put it like all in the scope of work?
That's a good question. I think one of the things that might be useful to take a second and define is kind of what these sections are. Because I think, as I said, I've worked for a couple of different companies now, and I've seen these sort of sections in different ones. And I think having a clear definition for those does help. So the executive summary is usually the first section that somebody reads. And that's kind of basically, I think a lot of it is for compliance purposes. It's just kind of, company came, company did a test, company stopped testing on this date, just like the very basic legal stuff. And then we get into the executive analysis, which is a little bit more of that high level overview of, like, these are the things we tested, these are the things that we found, et cetera, et cetera. Scope of work, I think, is a very, again, for a sort of scientific section, because we're talking about, like, these are the things that we tested, these are the things that were in scope, these are the things that were out of scope, and so we didn't test them. You'll often sometimes find a section about, like, we weren't able to test this for this reason, or, like, we had access issues, so we lost a couple days of testing, unfortunately, like that kind of stuff. And then we usually have the findings, which are the sort of building blocks. These are the individual things that we found, step-by-step guide, et cetera. And then recommendations, the kind of high level, fix this by doing this, fix this by doing that kind of thing. So those are kind of the sections. And I find that the executive analysis is probably a very good spot to stick that kind of story, that kind of narrative in. Because both of the sections that are labeled executive, you probably still got the C-level's attention. So, like, they're paying attention. This is where you really kind of need to drive home, like, this is bad for these reasons, so that hopefully your customer can get the thing fixed. And then the scope of work, I do try to keep a little bit more dry, a little more scientific, a little more like, these things were in scope, these things were out of scope, like kind of setting the parameters for the test and then kind of working within that parameter.
Cool. All right. I think this is it's pretty important. And also what I like to do, I really add a little bit of a snippet to the exec analysis about the state of remediation, just like to enable them to see, okay, at a later point in time, when they go back to the report, and at Cobalt, we like to update this regularly so that they can always update, get an updated report. That's super cool and valuable for them when they look at it later then to see, oh, okay, I've already fixed 80% of all of that. And there's only 20% left, makes a lot better impression at the client then.
Oh, definitely. And like, at the end of the day, the vulnerabilities are the things that need to get fixed. So like having that upfront, that's very important. It's there's the phrase borrowed from journalism is burying the lead. You don't want to put like the most important piece of information down at the bottom of the report or nobody's going to read it. This is one of the things that happened a lot in journalism. One of the things that I had to learn very quickly not to do, because I'd take the like really cool and interesting bit and put that 6 paragraphs right down and nobody read it. And so my stories didn't do as well until I started throwing that right up front, because that's why people clicked on the headline, was they want to know what happened.
Exactly. So, and now this is kind of counterproductive. Why do we put the recommendations at the end then?
I've seen it done where the recommendations are a little bit closer to the top. It kind of, I think, can vary. I do kind of like the format of sticking them down at the end, because it is a sort of, from a narrative perspective, it's kind of the ending. It's the call to action, the go do something, fix this, that kind of thing. But I could definitely see an argument for moving it closer to the top, because that's the stuff that people are looking for. One of the things that really helps too is having like a well-structured document with a table of contents, and especially with the reports that I work with at Cobalt, like we can just click and go straight to various sections because there's a little clickable table of contents, which makes our lives a lot easier, because we can just send people, they can just go straight to it. So that's also that's a very nice feature that kind of lets us have a little bit more flexibility with the structure of the document. And I will say structure is one of those things that you don't really think about it. And that's probably a good thing, because if you're thinking about the way a document is structured as you're reading it, then it means that it wasn't structured extremely well. So that's kind of the point of templating, is, you build it so it can be uniform, and then that people can kind of stick the information in the right spot. And if somebody's kind of thinking about this on the back end, then you've got the freedom to just kind of focus on making sure that your information kind of shines through.
Absolutely. And that's also kind of the thing what we learned here over the past years. It's super important to provide pentest structure. If you don't do this, you get so many variations of pentest reports, and each of them varies so much that you can't imagine. And that varies from super good to super bad. And you kind of want to really establish quality standard. And that's only possible with templates. So absolutely. Yeah.
And that is one of the sort of thin paths. What's the word I'm looking for? I don't know, some expression that means I have to kind of balance things. That's one of the things that I have to balance is, on the one hand, I do want people to kind of have a little bit of their own voice and have a little bit of their I don't want every single report to sound exactly the same, like it just got churned out by a robot or something, because that's kind of boring to read, but also it does mean that you could just sort of copy and paste and just change the names and change the vulnerabilities and stuff like that. And so it doesn't feel as sort of bespoke and unique to the customer. So I do try to balance that with the fact that I do want things to be a little bit uniform. I want them to be consistent. I want a Cobalt report to sound like it came from Cobalt. I want a document that I write to sound like something I write. So it's kind of that balance, and it's something that I worry about. It's probably not something that a pen tester needs to worry about per se.
I think actually a pen tester, at least myself, I really want to make sure that my pen test report sounds like a story. Because if I could have just pasted the same result out of burp into the report then. And then I'm not calling myself a pen tester. I don't know, I'm a professional copy paster. So that's not what my profession is. And that's not what I want to do. So I think it's really important that we as an industry come to the point where we really differentiate ourselves from the scanner output and the deliverable of manual pen testing. So
I think, yeah, it is definitely a very a key area where you can kind of separate the automated results, or I'm very much not a fan of people copying and pasting from CVE or OASP or any of the other big websites, because if I get a vulnerability that's I don't have the right access controls, and somebody's copied and pasted and stuck in the information that is on the Open Web App project, I could just Google missing access controls get the exact same information. So that's another opportunity to kind of say something specific to the test, say something specific to like, this is the way that your access controls work, and this is why they're not working quite right, as opposed to generally saying like, hey, bad access controls are bad. Like that's okay, obvious.
No, absolutely. And coming to the findings report or the finding reports here individually, I think it's super important that you really provide a specific link to a specific resource that helps the client. Like what I really like to link is the OWASP cheat sheet. That stuff is just amazing because it's very specific. It really includes so much remediation details that can just be applied in most of the cases just out of the box. And just a generic link to, I don't know, OWASP saying, okay, there's cross-site scripting, that's why it's bad. Show a bit more, please.
I think it's good to have both, definitely, because like that's the thing. Customers want all the information that they can get. They want to be able to do the research. So I think it's really important to speak, like in the report, you want to speak to their specific instance, but then that general information is super useful as well because it helps them kind of figure out like what to do next. We're giving the recommendations. We're saying like, you gotta, upgrade this thing, you gotta implement this thing. And then they're kind of stuck with how, like, what does that mean? And so, as you said, like the cheat sheets are super helpful, like information like that really gives them like, not just fix this thing, but here's where you can go to get the specific information. And if you can't get it from there, then maybe go to the vendor, like that kind of like, not just a command, but also instruction.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And especially for a finding, I think also something to keep in mind is that we may even have differentiating audiences here too. We may have the engineering manager, we may have the security engineer, and we may even have in a startup a C-level that's looking at the individual finding. So it's good to have a generic finding description that puts it into context, that quickly explains why and what it is, and then go into much more detail in the proof of concept section or in the criticality then later.
Yeah, one of the things that I like to see when I'm editing a vulnerability report is I kind of imagine like if somebody were to just print out just this vulnerability report, is there enough information that I can just take this printout, hand it to someone and say, go find this and fix this? And if there's a couple pieces of information missing, like then that's probably a sign that I need to go back and do some editing. If there's too much information, that might also be a good sign that there's some stuff to fix. But at the end of the day, I just kind of want to be able to make sure that like this one specific vulnerability gets addressed, because otherwise, why bother reporting it?
Oh, for sure. And it has like sometimes really, really crucial outcome for a client, because if the vulnerability report is not good enough, not detailed enough, maybe people don't understand it, then people don't prioritize it correctly, and then it will maybe lead to a breach later. So, and that's all because somebody didn't write the finding report correctly. It's a massive outcome.
Oh yeah, it's one of the things that it keeps me up at night. Not really, but is one of the things that I'm kind of looking at when I'm talking about, especially when it comes to like, we were able to get this far, but an attacker could go even further. That's the part that always makes me a little bit leery, because I want to make sure that I'm communicating the risk without saying specifically like this is the only thing that could go wrong. Because as I said earlier, like computers are smart, but they're also easy to fool. And somebody with that kind of access could do something completely different that we don't predict. So I used to talk about having sort of one step of conjecture where I just say like, if I get access, if I can guess somebody's password, then I could get access to their account. I don't want to then go on and say like, I can, launch the missiles or whatever, because I don't know. I don't know if that's what they're going to do, or they're just going to like mine Bitcoin. Like who knows? Who knows what they're going to do?
Is this something where the active versus passive voice could help a little bit to transfer that around like how important it is?
Yeah, I will say I think active voice is super important for just generally throughout the report. But I do think also like specifically attaching something to this sort of hypothetical attacker. And then different companies kind of use a different term for that hypothetical person. So just make sure you're kind of following the style guide for that. A plug for the style guide. But yeah, I think kind of associating it with something and giving something the specifics. One of the things I've said in the past as well to people when I'm kind of talking them through reporting is I think it's kind of like if you've ever read like a cozy mystery, like a Poirot or, you know, another Agatha Christie hero. It's kind of, the report is kind of that scene at the end where they're in the parlor and they're talking about like, I know who did it and here's why, you went there, you did that, like that kind of thing. So kind of framing it like that actually in a weird way helps because again, you've got that narrative thing and it's the person kind of reconstructing logically and actively with the active voice of like, you know, I did this thing. I was here when this happened. I saw this. One of the actors that's very useful to go back to active voice in a Pentest report is also the application itself, or a server or like a specific piece of technology can also do things in the report. So like active versus passive voice. Passive voice would be like, you know, an error appeared, or, you know, an error was triggered would probably be a more clear example, as opposed to when I did X, the application triggered an error. So it's kind of what the difference is there. Mm-hmm. And with that Agatha Christie example, it's, you know, I'm the detective. I went and did this thing to kind of test, and then this is what happened.
This was, to me, one of the most impactful things when I read a report that was reviewed by you, because it really makes a huge difference. It makes it a lot more actionable. When you read through that, I did this, you can literally think, okay, you're reading it as the pen tester right now, and you're feeling that you literally do it again, the pen test. And that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. That makes it a lot more actionable. And I hope that also the audience that's consuming the findings later feels the same. So then it would be amazing.
Yeah, definitely. That's actually probably a good time to ask, what's some stuff that you try to make sure that you include? What are some tools that you use or tricks that you use to kind of make sure that you're getting all the information in the right place, so that when I come along, I can at the very least just kind of sand off some of the rougher edges?
Oh yeah, this is like note-taking, man. That's a science. So it's crazy. I'm a really huge fan of mind maps. I like to go crazy with mind maps, because especially if you have a big scope, it helps to keep the overview. If you have and I'm also a friend of text files. So that's the other thing. When you have a huge scope and you have 20 text files, you go crazy and don't want to do that. So you basically link the files in the mind map to specific targets, screenshots and all that. You group it together, and then you have you're an artist at the end. You have a huge mind map that just really displays the entire attack surface and really enables you to think creatively.
Oh, that's interesting. That's a technique I honestly haven't heard before, but I've heard similar things with I know some folks who do creative writing and write novels and stuff. And that's the kind of thing that they use when they're planning chapters, or when they're planning the overarching plot of the story. So it's kind of interesting to kind of hear that in a different context. And I will say, one of the things that, because I also read a fair amount of fiction, but also some advice on writing fiction, one of the things that I've noticed is everybody's got a different way to do it. So if you found a way that works for you, there's no wrong answer, as long as you're getting the results that you're looking for. The mind map strategy sounds awesome, honestly.
Yeah, sometimes I feel like actually this would be nice as an additional appendix to the report. It's like a piece of art at the end that's just super big and kind of helps you understand how the attacker thinks actually when they looked at your attack surface. So, but yeah, we are not there yet, I think, as an industry to include mind maps in Pentest reports, but maybe at some point.
Maybe that would be really cool, honestly, because that'd be kind of just a neat thing to look at, because I do also like the kind of visual representation. I was going to say, one of the other things that we used to talk about at one of my previous gigs was a lot of screenshots. Screenshots were super important, and one of the things you want to keep an eye out for is take a screenshot for everything, but also make sure that it's that you're focusing in on where the specific action is. You're kind of closing in on just the part that really needs to be focused on. Because if you got the whole screen and you show that to the customer, they have no idea where they're looking. So kind of zoom in, call outs, little like red circles around the thing or squares, that kind of thing. Those can also be super helpful, but really like making sure that the font is big enough to read, and that the area of like the specific area that you're trying to point out is called out. I think those are also super helpful for generally for constructing stuff, because a picture is worth 1,000 words, as they say.
Oh, for sure, for sure. And then if you include that in the steps to reproduce, like 1, 2, 3, and all that, and you support it with screenshots, it's so much easier to reproduce. So screenshots are like really a fundamental part of a good finding report and a good Pentest report too.
Oh, definitely. If I'm like, even when I'm trying to fix something on my computer, if I've got screenshots on the like walkthrough and I get like the same message, then I know I'm going in the right direction. So like for somebody who's actually trying to fix like their network, it's got to be invaluable, because the stakes are so much higher than me just trying to make sure that, you know, Word stops crashing.
Oh, for sure. And human beings are actually, they're pretty simple. They just try to see if they can reproduce something exactly as the person that reported it before. They look at the exact same output. Does it look the same? Is it the same color? Is it the same button? Whatever. It's really this what it actually makes a good finding report, and to get to that state where people can reproduce it exactly. Yeah,
that was one of the things that kind of came up a few times when I was working on some for documentation purposes for how to write reports, but also back at the financial company too. Like if people were using a Mac versus a PC, like some of the feedback we got was like my error message was different because I'm on a different operating system. And it's very easy to throw someone if you're looking at something just slightly different. So those are the kinds of things that you kind of need to keep an eye out for and acknowledge. Is like, you gotta maybe make sure you're including as many different options as you can, because people don't like to think they're doing the wrong thing. It kind of can make people nervous when they're trying to follow a step-by-step.
Exactly. And then you kind of are in that weird sense of, okay, am I completely stupid, not trying to understand this here in the right way? I'm not that smart as the pen tester and stuff like that. You really want to be collaborative and make sure that everybody is consuming it as quickly as possible. No, sure.
Oh yeah. I think collaboration is another key point. Like, especially if you've got a technical writer that you can tap into, and you're like, I've just been picking at the sentence for 20 minutes and I don't know how to make it say the thing I want to say. Just reach out and ping them. If you've got a teammate, having a second set of eyes on something, even if they're, kind of coming from the same level of, grammatical prowess as you are, just having somebody else who knows what you're trying to say and can tell you if you're not saying it is extremely helpful. And, for a lot of questions where you're like, I'm not really sure what the best way to communicate this is, asking the customer, asking the person that you're actually going to present the report to, like, what's the most useful way that I can give you this information so I can meet you where you need to be? That can be huge. So writing is definitely not done in a vacuum, even if you are just kind of sitting and hammering away at a keyboard on your own.
Absolutely. And sometimes the client maybe has like a specific focus that they really would like to highlight, that specific vulnerability that they want to fix now for 30 years, but don't get the right attention. So, and then we can collaborate with the client to make it as detailed as possible in the Pentest report and make a win-win out of it. So.
Oh, definitely. We've definitely had, I've definitely seen situations like that where it's like, this is a vulnerability I know is bad, and I know we need to hit this point. So, the pen tester is usually telling me that that's what the customer said to them. So I'm going, okay, well, you can provide just like a little bit more detail here. You can repeat it elsewhere in the report if you've got a good way to do that. Repetition can be helpful as long as it's not just copy paste, but like saying the same thing in a slightly different way can really, rhetorically drive that point home. So it's that kind of stuff of like little tricks where you're kind of, not doing a ton of work, but still kind of getting that message across. And again, that's the kind of thing you can only really get by just asking, like, hey, what do you need from this report?
Nice. That's such an amazing end, actually. That's like, we end up with collaboration is key. That's just perfect. Fits perfect to Cobalt. And it's actually what I also would take away from here is that writing a Pentest report is pretty damn fun, actually, if you do it right.
Oh, definitely. It's One of the things that I also like to tell pen testers when I'm working with them is like, you're the expert. Like they brought you in to find some information, to find some stuff. So like, you're not, yes, the report is kind of this requirement. It's got kind of hanging over you the whole time you're doing it, but it's an opportunity to kind of show that like their faith in you is not misplaced, that you have an expertise and your expertise is pen testing. And, you know, working with the customer, working with the people on your team, working with your tech editors, you can create this document that really showcases your expertise in a way that like makes, you know, produces results for the customer, because at the end of the day, that's kind of how you pay the bills, but also kind of is a good example of your work. And then you've learned a little bit more about how to communicate yourself, which you can take to the next test.
No, absolutely. And after all, it's the pen tester's name on the report, you know, that's like kind of representing you. So you want to make sure that this is like the best thing that goes out there. So no, absolutely.
Oh, definitely.
Cool.
Awesome.
So, thank you, everyone, for turning this into another amazing Pentester Diaries episode. I want to thank Grahame today. It was super cool to chat with you about it. I can really learn a lot from your passion about writing and all that. I really enjoy talking with you every single time. Super cool.
Yeah, it was a pleasure.
Thank you so much. I'm the host, Robert Kugler, and we hope you enjoyed the conversation. Thank you so much.
Hi there. Thanks for listening to Pentester Diaries, a podcast brought to you by Cobalt.io. We hope you enjoyed and welcome you to subscribe, share, or leave a review wherever you tune in from. You can catch more episodes by following Cobalt on LinkedIn and Twitter. Stay tuned for more episodes.